Welcome to Teleport, a Blake 7 podcast, a brand new series of conversations, explorations and celebrations covering the classic BBC TV series Blake 7, a favourite of two generations plus of discerning cult TV fans, not just at home but the whole world over. During original transmission, though, standard by 52 sensational episodes were some of the most distinctive British science fiction ever made, a series that had a mainstream audience glued to the screen time after time, reliving the action, the character dynamics, and yes, those costumes, for days, weeks and months ahead. But here we are, over 4 decades after its final, thrilling episode, not only still talking about the world of Terry Nation's Blake 7, but watching it over and over again on the view screens of our choice, meeting the cast and crew, Blake 7 stars from both sides of the camera, as some of the most warm and engaging in the whole of geek culture, and even listening to or reading brand new adventures of our old favourites in audio drama and books. Your course is confirmed for the next hour or so here on Teleport. Hello, yes, welcome to a brand new Blake 7 reference point. I'm Dan Hadley, your regular host, Birmingham's King of the Geeks, and yes, a fan of this show since I was a mesmerised schoolboy back in the late 70s and the early 80s, and in all the time since, the show's never been too far from my thoughts. I talk about it any chance I get, frankly. My friends and family have suffered enough. Now it's your turn. Rather better news for you is it's not just me you'll be hearing from on Teleport. I've been speaking to several other magnificent people, and together we'll be coming at this series and those complex, lovable rogues from all sorts of perspectives. Any moment now, I'll be joined by the very first of those new crewmates, and you can go and pour yourself a glass of Soma if you haven't already, and enjoy. Yes, Blake 7, the cult science fiction serial that ran for 4 series on BBC TV from 1978 until 1981. You probably already know that if you found your way here. I know, but I'm just saying this for my benefit and the benefit of my guests, of course. Now, in that time, it attracted equal amounts of admiration, and it has to be admitted, derision too, and teasing from the mainstream audience and the press, sort of very affectionate teasing, I think. And for a long time, as fantasy entertainment expanded in pretty much every way during the 1980s, Blake 7 sort of became a byline for the cheap and the silly and the kitchen sink. It was this genre's crossroads, one could say, sinking slowly into one of my guests is laughing already. Sinking slowly into the sort of the postmodern clip show fodder that is the fate of so many sci-fi shows, and from then into obscurity, I suppose. But anyone with a good heart and a tuned ear could hear the distant drumming heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Because in that time, letters to points of view, which was the BBC's sort of most prominent point of audience contact before the internet, letters came in very, very steadily. And when all the home video sell-through market, when that really, really exploded for the BBC and for all the other labels, Blake 7 began a steady, standard by 30, nearly 40-year voyage back to critical reappraisal, a creative second life, and now attracting a new generation of fans. Here on Teleport, a Blake 7 podcast, we're launching with a peer out of the passenger side window of the Liberator, which I would expect they'd probably be hexagonal. I'd say that's a pretty safe bet. And at the series' own way back, specifically now with the debut of all 4 series on the streaming service BritBox this very month as of recording. And joining me, sort of stumbling out of the teleporter here to speak to us on this very first show, are 2 people that I feel, and I hope neither of them mind me saying this, illustrate the breadth of the appeal of Blake 7 in the 21st century, pretty perfectly. Lily Sherritt is a photographer, a curator and cult TV enthusiast from Cambridgeshire in England, whilst Graham Robertson is a graphic designer and podcaster and lifelong lover of the obscure. I've taken that from his Twitter profile, so that's that's approved. So he claims. He lives in Manchester. Welcome aboard. Zen has been instructed to recognise your voices and obey you in all things. How are you today, guys?
Exciting. This is great. Thanks for inviting us along. This is amazing to be on the first edition.
It is. Exciting, Lily. Are you excited?
I'm very excited.
You're a podcaster, aren't you, Graham? Tell us where people might have heard you before.
In terms of podcasting, I did over a year ago now a series of podcasts in Manchester that celebrated the LGBT community in Manchester, specifically the history of the LGBT community in Manchester. I did a few episodes of that until COVID kind of put the kibosh on it for now, but hopefully doing some more, if not later this year, then certainly early next year.
And Lily, I understand this is your first time on a podcast.
Yes, I've never done anything like this before, so it's all very exciting for me.
Well, you come very, very recommended because you're very active on Twitter in the Blake 7 community, aren't you?
I am. I mean, I've done a couple of conventions and things as well. I've been to those, and they're great. So yeah, very welcoming community, the Blake 7 fans. We love them.
I think that's fair. I think so. And for a long, long time, I think Blake 7 conventions they were started not long after the series actually ended on TV. Well, certainly around that time, I think that the model that had been brought into being particularly by Star Trek fans, but for the sake of a UK audience, we'll say Doctor Who fans, Blake 7 really carved out its own little niche with that. And throughout the decades, those conventions have carried on and carried on and carried on. And I'd say there's probably 3 in the average year, with various hooks where the costumes and the props and the cast and the crew, they travel around as well. It's got this lovely sort of family atmosphere about it, and I think that's probably one of the reasons why it's so welcoming. Even though it's obviously this is a vintage TV show we're talking about that hasn't made any new episodes in nearly 4 decades, that it would welcome you with open arms like that, Lily. It's really, really nice to hear. Okay, well, first of all, I'll ask you then, Lily, when did you first see Blake 7 or come across the brand, come across the name? Was it coming from another series or did you just happen upon it independently?
Well, I mean, in part it was the association with Terry Nation, but it was mostly through my brother because we were both at university. This was 2017, I think, and he'd seen it because of the Terry Nation connection, and he said, Lils, oh my God, you've got to watch this programme called Blake 7. And I was like, oh, terrific, who's in it? And I just watched Children of the Stones with Gareth Thomas in it, which was amazing, okay. And I loved that. And he was like, oh, Gareth's in it, and Paul Darrow, who was in the Silurians, was in it, and he just said, you've got to watch it. So when I went home, I think we watched, I don't feel like it was The Way Ahead, I think it might have been, was it Spacefall, Avon's first episode, I think, and then we watched the episodes through from there. But yeah, that's my first rather crazy introduction to Blake 7.
So Blake 7 wasn't a very easy show to find until fairly recently, was it?
No, Nick bought the DVDs and then we watched them when we were at home together. So
solid seller on DVD. And how about you, Graham? You're closer to my age, aren't you? You've been in the fandom for a little while. When did you first see Blake 7? Was it back in the day?
It was back in the day. I'm going to age myself now. I remember seeing a trailer for it during the Christmas period on the BBC. So that would have been Christmas 1977. So I do remember.
Oh, literally a trailer for the thing starting.
For it starting, yeah, because it started very early in January 1978. I do remember it quite clearly. Some kind of trail or some kind of announcement for it, and thinking it looked very, as a Doctor Who fan, thinking it looked right up my street. So I was on board right from day one. 2nd of January 1978, Monday night.
Great slot as well. And this is a common thing. I think a great many people found their way over from Doctor Who then and probably still do now. But I'm really interested that it was the Terry Nation connection for you, Lily. And some of those other serials that you'd seen first, because I watched Children of the Stones and various other things with those actors in long after I'd seen Blake 7, just because I wanted to see the same actors in other things. But you came over from the opposite direction.
Yeah, I don't remember how I saw Children of the Stones, to be honest. It might have been Phantom Films, actually, because I think possibly I bought a couple of things from them and saw the book and thought that looked interesting. I was like, ooh. So I think it was probably something like that.
And since you found it and watched it on DVD with your brother, obviously you've watched the entire thing, but is it something that you're constantly sort of rewatching? How many times have you watched it since discovering it?
Quite a lot. I mean, unfortunately, not recently, I think, because we've been watching other culty bits like Strangers and stuff. But yeah, I mean, we go back to it a fair bit, and particularly episodes like Gambit, which my other brother really loves watching. So we watch that a lot. And the other one, things like Sarcophagus, which I really love because it's different and odd, and Killer, because we all love that.
So you find it's a series that you can dip back into and sort of cherry pick or see what you fancy. I've never really watched it like that, Graham. I think I don't know why that is, but if I sit down and watch Blake 7 and I decide to watch an entire series, all of them,
right?
And I don't know why that is. Could it be because obviously you've been watching it longer than I have? It was very hard to find anywhere, wasn't it, for so long? And so when it turned up on VHS one by one, each episode we sort of savoured it in order. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, that was hugely exciting. When it was first released on VHS back in, I think it was in the early 90s, maybe 91. That was hugely exciting because it had been the first time to rewatch those episodes pretty much since they were first broadcast. I remember the fourth series was repeated in 1983, and that would have been the last time I'd actually seen a complete episode. So having those VHS tapes come out every month, I think it was 2 tapes a month, was hugely exciting. And I remember having that feeling that I used to have the night before Blake 7 was on, the night before the VHSs came out. So having access to those episodes kind of uncut was really exciting, really exciting.
Now you've mentioned it, I think I used to go through the old magazine TV Zone, which is a sister title to Starburst, and they would always have the dates, wouldn't they? And I think I used to make a note of them, Lily, and sort of count the weeks down. But at the time, yes, because you're absolutely right, they had repeated the final season. They always repeated Blake 7.
And they repeated it on a Saturday night, which was interesting. The series 4 repeats were on a Saturday evening.
Yes, they were. Good God.
Doctor Who's plot.
Forgotten all about that. And then afterwards, it was virtually impossible to see this show. But I think because there'd been at least 18 months between that fourth season's original showing and then the repeat, and they'd made it clear there wasn't going to be any more, I was a little prepared, Lily. So what I used to do, even though I had got a video cassette recorder, tapes were really expensive then, and I was only a kid. So I got some audio tapes, and I did the classic thing that people did with Doctor Who in the 60s and 70s, and I recorded the soundtracks to Series 4 of Blake 7 so I could listen to over and over again. These cassettes I bought, they were really, really cheap off the markets. They were all sort of... You know when you buy a pack of highlighter pens and they're like bright pink and bright green and bright yellow? They were like that, these tapes. And I filled them up with Blake 7. With a little bit of editing, I could fit one on if it was a C90 or something like that. Good God, don't know where those tapes are now. I think they've long since headed to the tip. But that was all I had for those 7 or 8 years. It seemed like such a long time. This contrast between your experiences, you being 2 or 3 years into this, Lily, and yourself, Graham, being there literally from trailer 1. My God, that's impressive. Because this show really does seem to have a way of casting a spell on people, and I don't know what it's got. I mean, we're seeing this now with other shows of the time. I think Space 1999 is enjoying a resurgence at the moment, which I think is lovely. I'm not really that familiar with that show, but Blake 7's had that for a very, very long time, and although it was an unknown quantity for you like 2 or 3 years ago, Lily, I understand that it's opened a door for you with the audio ranges and reading and all these other things, that it's become a full rounded place, the entire universe. But what is it about the show and about these characters and about vintage TV in general, really, that attracts you?
I mean, I think it's sort of interesting with Blake 7 that they're this sort of group of like mismatched people, and they've all got these different qualities, and it's this ongoing sort of battle for them of things, and it's not as easy as good versus bad. It's not like Star Wars, though I love Star Wars, don't get me wrong.
But it's very black and white, isn't it, Star Wars? We know who wears the black hat definitely. And who wears the white hat.
With Blake 7, it's something a bit different. You've got Blake and all his his morals and his ideals, and for me personally, I always want to be Blake. I'm like, yeah, Blake, although sometimes he's a reckless idiot, but anyway. And then you got Villa, who's the sort of who everyone's a little bit like, really, aren't they, Villa? And then you got Avon, who's the sort of swaggy kind of guy who everyone's like, oh, I want to be Avon, who's a bit of a bad boy. So you got all these kind of like characters, and they're just, I think, more interesting, and it's not as simple as good and bad, and there's all these little adventures that each character has. Sort of, you learn more about them as it goes on, particularly people like Callie and Aaron and her people later on in Children of Aaron, and that kind of thing, I think, is what I love.
They do evolve, don't they?
Yes.
Even though these characters are archetypes, they do evolve. I love that you said that how much you like Blake, because Graham, I mean, traditionally, in the playground, I used to play Blake 7 in the playground when I was a kid.
Too.
And nobody really wanted to be Blake.
Yeah.
But now, over time, I'm kind of with Lily. I think Blake is a fascinating character, whereas Avon may have all the swagger, but there really is something about Blake himself.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's only recently that I've kind of realised that actually I quite admire Blake as a character.
Me too.
At the moment I'm doing a rewatch every single week. We've been doing it since 2nd of January. Because there's 52 episodes, we've been watching one a week. And we've just last week reached the penultimate episode of Series C, the one with Tarrant's brother and the wig. So, we're very excited that Blake is going to come back. That Blake returns in the next episode. I kind of let it slip to my friends. Actually, Blake might return next week, and they're really genuinely excited about that. It's like, you actually missed him then. That's interesting. So yeah, Blake, I think he was kind of maybe not loved as much as he probably deserved to be.
It's interesting that you talk about that, about the no spoilers thing, that people can come to it now and not want to know what's going to happen. Yeah. Because, like you, a couple of years ago, I did a big watch through for the 40th anniversary, one episode every week. We did a big thing on social media about it, myself and some friends talking about each episode every week. It was a lovely thing to do and to share. And there were people involved in that who hadn't seen it before. So that was really, really interesting, because the way that I've felt about Blake 7 for a very, very long time. And I don't know if you found this, Lily, when you discovered the show and started talking to people about it. Most of the time when you talk about Blake 7 for such a long time, people only seem to ever want to talk about the final episode, as if it was the only episode of the show that was ever made. Don't get me wrong, I love the final episode of Blake 7. Of course I do. It made a huge impact on me as a child. But there are 51 other episodes that are, most of them are just as entertaining. A considerable amount of them are better than the final episode creatively and in lots of different ways. And I've got so much to say, and so much that's done with all the characters. Yeah, I was really frustrated about that a few years ago. I think the tide has definitely turned now, where people will talk about each series, each set of characters. And you're even getting people coming out the woodwork who prefer the Scorpio to the Liberator, like me. But then that's for another time. But did anybody spoil it for you, Lily? Did anybody try and spoil the finale for you when you said you'd got into it?
Not that I remember. I mean, my brother told me bits, so it might very well be that he did mention something. I don't remember, but I mean, I usually forget about it anyway before I get there.
I do that as well.
So not that I remember.
That's good to hear.
I don't think they did. Because, I mean, funnily enough, I met my boyfriend on the Blake 7 page, but that's another story entirely. And, yeah, I don't even think he said anything, because I think that was a little bit after that.
It's the ultimate spoiler, though, isn't it, that final episode?
Isn't it just?
Yeah.
You see, obviously there's a certain, when you know something like that, something so cataclysmic, I suppose there's a certain sort of impending doom. Maybe that's got some sort of ambience about it as well. But I've always thought it's a great, great pity. The fact that you would meet your partner through Blake 7, God, this just goes to show, doesn't it? Because the fan community and all fan communities have evolved onto social media. It's absolutely improved the fortunes of Blake 7, and we can sort of compare notes across the generations and across the world as well, because of course in other countries, Graham, they didn't have it like we did, with both Blake 7 and Doctor Who, particularly in Australia. They used to get these things repeated on rotation pretty much constantly, and so that's how bootleg videos used to make their way to the UK, didn't they? But I never managed to get hold of any of them. I think I had a really ropey copy of, funny enough, it was the Series C finale.
Right.
It was Terminal. Yeah, I had that for ages. So yeah, I lied a little then. I think I got that about a year before the official tapes started coming out. But it was at least 8th generation. It was certainly in black and white.
Well, I never really dabbled my feet in the fandom of Blake 7 until actually quite recently. So my only experience was watching it when it was broadcast live, buying the official magazine when that was around in sort of the last sort of year of the show. So I was never kind of party to that kind of underground of homemade merchandise and videotapes being kind of passed under the table. So yeah, I mean, fandom's something that I've kind of discovered the joy of, despite being a fan for 42 years. It's only something I've kind of discovered probably in the last 5 or 6 years, I'd say.
So what brought you back in? What specifically was it?
It's always been a constant. I mean, Blake 7's. You mentioned earlier on about what is it about the show, and I still can't really put my finger on what I love about it. I totally agree with Lily in terms of those shades of grey and those characters, and it's quite a spiky kind of science fiction show. But yeah, I was never really quite sure why I loved it. I think as I got older, but social media was a big part of getting back into like fan discussions and following the right people on things like Twitter and seeing the discussions and thinking, my goodness, these people feel just the same as I do. And I kind of always knew they were there, but having that closer contact through things like social media kind of opened a lot of doors, and I met a lot of really interesting people who had lots of interesting things to say about the show. And I ended up I went to my first Blake 7 convention only 4 or 5 years ago. I had the time of my life. It was amazing.
Yes, I still haven't been to one. Been to plenty of Doctor Who events, but not a Blake 7 one. I do hope to put that right, hopefully.
They're great events. As you said earlier, they're really, really friendly bunch of people. It's difficult not to come away from a Blake 7 convention and not having made at least half a dozen new friends. I
found the show later on. I suspect it was during Series C, so around 1979, 1980. And I'd like to say that it was the highly intelligent storylines that had attracted me to it, but no, it wasn't. It was the fact that it was at the height of Star Wars mania. I'd been to see The Empire Strikes Back, and really, I think it was the closest thing, certainly on British TV, to something of a similar appeal, particularly from the halfway mark. It goes from people wearing sort of soft shoes, plimsolls underneath slacks, to wearing knee-high leather boots and sort of wing collars and things like that. It starts to look like proper sci-fi then, and particularly when Avon, played by Paul Darrow, takes the lead, it seems to drive quite harder. That sort of Star Wars appeal purely, but of course over time, those two final series, and for years all I knew of the first 2 seasons were black and white pictures in the old Marvel Blake 7 monthly, which I snapped that up because that premiered, didn't it, with the start of Series D.
It did.
So I started buying that all the time, and there was just the odd black and white picture from the earlier ones. And even though it had only been 4 years earlier, Lily, at that time in my life, I was 7, something like that. And so, 4 years, that's over half my lifetime ago. It seemed impossibly long time ago. And I bought several books after that. I suppose like Doctor Who and like other things, the mystique around it, even though it was just 52 episodes, I think that was part of the appeal. Knowing that it had been around for a while already, and you could see that it had got a lore and a dynamic, and I think that I knew it was unlike anything else on TV. I mean, certainly it was so different from Doctor Who, which I'd been watching already at that point for a very, very long time. It was probably as simple as the Cowboys and Indians aspect as well, because it was great. It was actually, I think it's probably better than Doctor Who for reenacting in the playground.
Yeah.
But you could pick sides, who was going to be the Federation, who was going to who was going to be one of the seven. Sort of like how you were saying, Lily, the band, the Shades of Grey. And of course, if somebody had got curly hair, then of course they were Tarrant.
Did you make a bracelet? Did you make a teleport bracelet out of cardboard?
Of course I did. I made several bracelets and scribbled, I drew various things out. And because they had, Blue Peter, they had one of their, make a teleport bracelet makes on. I think they probably still do makes now. I didn't record that because we didn't have a video recorder at the time. I actually, as they were explaining it on the show, I sat there with a piece of paper, sort of drawing everything that Janet Ellis was saying to do, so that I wouldn't forget how to make this later. Yeah, I did make myself a Blake 7 bracelet.
Excellent.
Well, I think every time I go back to this show, it does transport me back in time a little. But I also find, Lily, that with every repeated viewing, I do get something more out of it. I'm not sure that every episode of Blake 7 is a work of literature on screen, but I think there is a lot of depth to it, and that could be part of why it's still being discovered now, because there's always something extra to see. There's always something under the surface, and that sounds like that's what you latched onto. But if you've got a favourite character,
it's sort of for me between probably Blake and Callie. I think for me, yeah, Blake, because he sort of he's a bit like me. He wants to go and try and save the world and beat the Federation, and he's never gonna fully do it. He's honourable, yeah, and he's got his morals and he stands by them, and he can be a bit of a plank, but he's well-meaning.
I can't throw any stones there. And why Callie?
Callie, why do I love Callie? I mean, telepathy is pretty cool.
I think we'd all like to be able to do that, don't you think, Graham?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think she's quite an interesting character, and the fact that she's not human, she's this sort of alien, and the little I suppose things she does that are a little bit unusual, and the way her story progresses as well, I think is interesting.
She's an oddity, I think, in this kind of show. She is an outsider and she is an alien. What I find interesting now is that they don't play her as an object of desire, as anything sort of. There's nothing like that about her. The way that, for example, Marina is in Stingray. It's not like a sexual or a romantic thing. The character's got her own. You get the impression that she's got her own things going on. That for all that she can hear in everybody else, if she wishes, that the contents of her own head are even more interesting. I think it's a fantastic character, and all the performances, I think, as you go on, they seem to impress me. They seem to impress me more, Graham. I mean, if there's one character that used to bore me to tears, I'm sorry, Sally, but it was Jenna. I couldn't connect with that character at all. Couldn't really understand why she was there. I couldn't remember anything about her, and yet the last 2 times that I've gone through the series, I've really latched onto that character. How the specific position that she's in. She's somewhere between Avon and Blake, isn't she? She's certainly not amoral, but she's not honourable either. And there's something really fascinating, because I think as an adult, as somebody who's considerably older now, and I can sort of see the point that she's at a lot of the time. And Sally Yvette plays that really, really well, doesn't she?
Yeah, I think, and apart from Gan, I think she was the one character who was just, she wasn't written particularly well. There was so much potential there for that character, and her background that we learned in the very first episode was fascinating. And it would have been good to see that character emerge. She kind of became the person that pressed the buttons and gave the boys their picnic basket before they went down to the planet. Like I can fully understand why Sally wanted to leave the show, but as a character, I think she had so much potential, and it's a shame that she didn't come back with Blake in that final episode. That would have been fantastic. But
I think it's a testament to everything that Sally does, all her skills as an actress, that she makes that character so vivid. The rose-tinted glasses aren't always on about Blake 7. So I think that most of the characters are probably underdeveloped on this show. That's never an ideal. It's not what any of us want. But as a positive, what I was just saying about Callie, it does lend them all this mystique almost. I think it's because all the actors were just so good and were professional enough to hang in there and to keep bringing their bringing their best.
I think the actors are a big part of the success of the show. They did such a lot with the material they were given, and obviously you can't imagine anyone else playing those parts. But every single one of those actors brought something really unique to those characters, to the point where we're still debating and talking about them so many years later.
When you sort of take the lid off this whole box on this entire universe, this is the kind of conversation that used to be discussed around the circular tables in the snugs at pubs, didn't it? When you had a few, but I'm talking particularly about guys of our age, Graham, where we talk about stuff that we used to watch when we were a kid. Somebody would always bring up Blake 7, and for a while it sort of survived solely on conversations like that, and on the clip shows and things that I was talking about earlier on, things like Telly Addicts, where they'd drop out a clip from it now and again just to test the audience's memory, or somebody like Clive James would show a clip from it. Lily, imagine this. TV pundits would show clips from it to demonstrate poor production values and even sexism and things like that, which you could point to one or two scenes, I'm sure. I never felt that was a fair representation of the show. Even then, I think those days are gone now too. Lily, do you have a particularly favourite instalment of the show, or a favourite season?
Oh, that's a very hard question. I mean,
I'm not sure I do. That's why I'm asking you.
I don't think I have one favourite episode. I think I have quite a few. I mean, if I had to pick sort of a top 2 or 3, for me it's probably Killer, I think, and Project Avalon, and possibly first episode as well, because I think that's just something so different that I don't think ever quite came back in the same way. I think it's a very interesting episode. The kind of the introduction of Blake and the darkness and the
tonally it's different as well.
Yeah.
It could sit on its own, couldn't it, Graham? Almost like Play for Today. Remember how that used to be? They used to make one-off plays, and some of them were sci-fi, weren't they?
Yeah, they were. Dominic Hyde. Remember Flipside with Dominic Hyde?
Love that. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right. The tone was completely. Episode 1 of Blake 7 couldn't be more different in tone to something like Gambit or Animals, or I mean, the canvas that it paints on is huge. I do sometimes. I would love to have seen them explore more of that universe. Those first 3 episodes of that kind of living under the Federation, that really dark kind of totalitarianism thing. That I loved that, and I'd like to have seen that perhaps explored a lot more. But that's not to take away from how the show developed, because I grew to love it more and more. So
they make for a very oppressive watch, don't they? Those first 3 episodes, they're really, really, really intense. Have you got a favourite chunk of those 52, or did you used to have a favourite? Do you find that changes over time?
It changes frequently. I mean, absolutely, those first 2 or 3 episodes still hook me in, but I've got a particular fondness for the 2 Tanith Lee episodes, because they're like nothing else the programme did, and to look at something like Sarcophagus, imagine that went out at like primetime on BBC One on a Monday night. It's the most bizarre looking and sounding and feeling episode of television, and Sand in season 4, which if I had to pick a favourite episode, might be that one today, maybe. But that exploration of Servalan and her performance, Jacqueline Pierce's performance in that episode, it still kind of almost brings me to tears. So the 2 Tanith Lee episodes, the first 2 or 3 episodes, but at some point I think almost every episode's been a favourite over the last 42 years.
I can relate to that. I mean, Lily, you just mentioned Killer, and left me cold for so long. I absolutely love that. I absolutely love that now. But what you mentioned there about the Tanith Lee episodes, Graham, they're 2 of the most charged of all of them, aren't they? And there is a for all that I was saying about Callie earlier on, there's a sexual quality to both of those, aren't there? I remember when Sand was on, that episode is a prime example, a sort of a key stepping stone with me to show me what sci-fi could really do. How it peels away at the 2 characters, both Tarrant and Servalan, that made a big impact on me.
And to have that pairing of Tarrant and Servalan rather than Avon and Servalan was really brave as well. I thought that was completely unexpected, and to have them sitting down and having a meal together, it's just, there's lots going on in that episode that I find fascinating, absolutely fascinating.
Here's one for you both. This is a lightning question. This is going to be a fixture of the show going forward from here on. A lightning question, the very first one. Lily, Aurak or Zen?
Oh, Zen. Zen, because I think if Aurak was a person, I'd have to kill him. Because quite honestly, no, I mean, I love Aurak, don't get me wrong, but he's an annoying...
Too fussy? Graham, Zen or Aurak, which one would you
go? Zen, that noble character. I'm not looking forward to watching Terminal this week and watching the death of Zen. That's such a heartbreaking moment when he refers to himself as I for the first time. Yeah, Zen was amazing.
Not a dry eye in the house. Again, another character that I've gradually come round to over the years. Everything that Peter Tuddenham does in the voice work on all three of the characters, he's so consistent, isn't he? In what you could say is a thankless role. At least he didn't have to do it on his hands and knees like John Leeson did as K9. But can you imagine? I remember being at a convention and Peter Tuddenham was there, and I didn't get to speak to him. It was a Doctor Who event. But it was one of these where it was like lots of different people from other sci-fi shows were sort of dotted around here and there. It was one of those, isn't that the guy? Because, of course, there wasn't that many pictures of Peter at the time. But, just saw the odd picture of him in a cravat.
Yeah.
He's another one. He just became this really sort of romantic character, got this air around him. And that brings me to my next question, actually. You talk about Blake 7 conventions. Obviously, you've probably met a fair amount of the cast or people involved. So, who have you met, Graham? Who's made a big impact on you over the years?
I remember the first time I met. I've only met Paul Darrow twice. One was at an event in Fab Cafe in Manchester where he was doing a reading. I was completely in awe. We're only talking about 8 or 9 years ago. I was in awe. I didn't know what to say, how to act around him. Yeah. I took a kind of surreptitious selfie with him standing behind me, and I looked petrified in the picture. But I met him kind of properly, I guess, at one of those Blake 7 conventions in Steventon in the town hall there. He was just the nicest bloke. He was so nice and really interested in talking to the fans and making sure they got what they wanted, get the pictures right, and he was amazing. So I was in awe of meeting Paul Darrow, but
he got it. The whole fan thing.
He was the spirit of Blake 7 right up until the end. I think he kind of kept that flame burning more than anyone. I think.
Go on, you met Jan Chappell as well.
Well, Jan Chappell, I kind of didn't realise I'd met until she was standing in front of me at that same Blake 7 convention. Yeah. I was kind of wandering around the stalls, and there's this small woman in front of me, and I didn't realise for about 5 minutes that it was Callie, and I had a bit of a moment then as well. So even being around the cast now, you kind of feel that magic, and it's like meeting the Beatles.
I suppose it is really. Lily, you've been going to these conventions for 2 or 3 years, and I follow you on Twitter. You put up various pictures of you with lots of different cast members from lots of different shows. But who have you met, and have you had pictures with some of these actors? Who's been your standouts?
For me, probably the most exciting one ever was probably Gisette Simon. She was lovely. She was amazing. She was honestly one of the best people ever. She's amazing. I can't even talk, but yeah, she was lovely. And then I've met Jan. I never met Paul, unfortunately, or Jacqueline, or Gareth, sadly. So that's a bit of a shame. But I've met Brian as well. He's a character. Yeah. He's terrific.
Oh, Brian Croucher.
Yeah, he's terrific. He's a bit barking mad. And Michael, of course, he's absolutely lovely. Michael, a real gentleman, Michael.
No, I've never met Michael Keaton, but full of I met Brian Crouch and Jan Chappell at a signing event. They were both in a Doctor Who fan film thing called Shakedown in the mid-90s, and I went along to get that signed. Like the pure Doctor Who convention's a pure Doctor Who fan, but of course, the fact that I was there with Travis and Callie, that didn't pass me by, believe me. And I met Jacqueline Pearce as well in 1990. At the time, she was living abroad, and I wasn't prepared to be quite as embarrassed as I was. But everybody's got their outrageous story about Jacqueline Pearce, and I very briefly met Paul Darrow. That's probably a story for another time. But yeah, I think these actors, all of them get it. I think they're all very affectionate towards the fans in return for loyalty, I suppose. They know that the fandom has kept this show and that world close to their hearts for a time, because nobody was interested, were they, for a very long period. I mean, what I was saying about the show earlier on, obviously fashion comes and goes, and for a time, just the fact that something was old was enough to mean that it was almost not worth looking at again. I think that for all that we could bemoan the 21st century, that's not the case now. Audiences now and new generations of fans are a little bit more sophisticated, really. I think that the fact that something was made in the past doesn't put people off the way it used to. People never used to go near black and white content, I think, for a very long time. I think maybe it could have still have been a bit of a fallout from colour TV coming in. I think that could have been a thing even into the 80s. Why would I want to watch black and white stuff when I've got a colour TV? I remember my grandparents saying that. But Blake 7 has absolutely escaped from underneath all of that. And since the 1990s, audio has been the saviour, hasn't it, of science fiction in many respects, certainly domestically in Great Britain, because we were behind the times. I think when there was the big explosion of interest in sci-fi and geek entertainment in the 90s with shows like The X-Files and Star Trek The Next Generation, our broadcasters wanted to be making those kinds of shows, but the money still wasn't there. There was no co-production deals, so it never seemed to quite happen. There was a one-night Doctor Who thing, and there was a couple of sort of quasi attempts on a Saturday night, but never quite got there. And Blake 7 started to appear again, didn't it, Graham?
Yeah.
In audio form on BBC Radio with a couple of news stories. And they were reasonably successful, weren't they? But now we are 20 years after that, and Blake 7 really feels alive again. And that's got to be in part due to the work of B7 Media, but most latterly, Big Finish. You mentioned earlier on, Lily, that you've got a lot of Big Finish. You own a lot of their content. So did you find their Blake 7 stuff first, or was that Doctor Who? How did you get into all that?
Well, I remember my first two audios were a Mike Yates one, because I'm a big Pertwee fan and a big Unit fan, and then Iris Wildtime as well. And then I'm trying to remember when Blake 7 even came into the mix. Must have been probably...
Was it like, they do Blake 7 as well?
Yeah,
was it like that?
Probably, something like that. Probably around the time I started watching it with Nick, I was probably like, this is a thing? What? Mine. Thank you very much. I think it was probably something like that.
Because here we are in 2020. This is the autumn of 2020 we're speaking now. And, this hasn't been. Nobody's going to ever forget this. It's not been the best of years, has it? COVID-19 and lockdown have affected us all. For fan communities, it's sort of rallied us, really, hasn't it? And brought us together. And social media has been an integral part of that. And particularly Twitter, Graham, you were mentioning Twitter earlier on. It's a very, very creative place. I find that's the saving grace of Twitter for all its evils.
Yeah.
I suppose it was pioneered by Emily Cook with her work with Doctor Who magazine and then doing Doctor Who watch-alongs. Lily, you've been a big part of listen-alongs, haven't you, with Blake 7 audio content. How did that come about? How did you get involved in it?
Well, initially we started with what they called the Paul Spragg trips, which were the Doctor Who ones, and because they were free we thought, we could do a listen along with these. And so I had a little chat with the people who'd written those for the competition, and we all had a little tweet and got involved in that. As it went along, I thought, we must do some Blake 7. I think it was Warship that we did first with Peter Angelides, because I was like, are you up for this? And he was like, yes. And then from that we had probably my personal favourite tweet along, which was to the 40th anniversary one, which was The Way Ahead. We had Mark Wright, who I absolutely love. He's such a fan, it's terrific. And then John Ainsworth and Simon Power, I think, as well, got in on it, and we had a few giveaways and things. So it sort of stemmed from that, and it's been great fun.
It continues that tradition, doesn't it? We were talking about the actors who get it. These are the writers and the creatives who put these audios together. Most of them, as you said, lifelong fans and keen as mustard to come to the party. I followed a lot of those tweet-alongs, as many as I could. I'm not great at multitasking, Graham, I have to say, just between you and I. I'm not brilliant at it. But yes, I did enjoy all that. What I found more entertaining, I didn't listen along to any of them, if truth be told, but I did spy the conversations and get the references and the things that made people laugh. were often what made me laugh. But again, people drop things out, not just about the making of the stories, but about, you know, their geeky interests, their favourite stories or their favourite characters. And sometimes people say things that they probably shouldn't as well, which is always a bit of a giggle. Yeah, I think that the fan community has definitely sort of been the silver lining to a very big cloud this year. And the fact that the people who put this content out, far from saying, you know, well, this is our property, you know, we decide how it gets promoted, they're more than happy, aren't they, to see the fans sort of be enthused, because it's infectious, this enthusiasm, isn't it, Graham? You see it from another point of view, don't you? Because you have your own online shop, don't you? Make a range of what would you call them, collectibles, a lifestyle brand that you run called Cult Edge.
Yeah.
Did that start with Blake 7 for you as well?
Yeah, I mean, the heart of that whole kind of operation, if you like, is Blake 7, and it comes from the fact that it was never a very heavily merchandised show. You know, you couldn't nip into Forbidden Planet and pick up a Blake 7 t-shirt, let alone anything like an action figure. So yeah, the whole kind of my kind of whole ethos for doing the Cult Edge stuff is very much grounded in Blake 7. Perhaps I do a little too much Blake 7. Maybe I need to look at some other shows as well, but it's that pool, it just won't let me go. But yeah, it's all about reaching out to those fans like me who didn't have access to lots of merchandise and lovely Blake 7 things. So that's why I did it. That's why I do it. Certainly don't make a lot of money out of it, and I don't do it to make a lot of money, but I do it because I want to see those things out there, and I want to share the lovely Blake 7
That's
things with people.
very much it for me. You know, it's that thing, kind of what you were just saying, Lily, when you discovered the audio range. It was, what, Liberator, Teleporter, Bracelet, Socks exist. it was like that. And I have to say, you can't see this at the moment, but Graham sat here now sporting an incredible Blake 7 t-shirt of his own design, which I shall definitely be taking a screenshot of later on, and that will go up on the Spacebooks Instagram feed for everybody to see, and there'll be lots of links as well. We're going to get people to plug whatever they want later on, but all of this is, I wouldn't say it's the domain of the fans. Of course it isn't. You know, we don't own Blake 7. We're only too aware of that. But the fact that it is not a Doctor Who, that it is not a Star Trek, that it's not the MCU, it's not anywhere near Disney, thank God. That it's not means that we can play in the sandpit as well, as long as we respect the guidelines and the operating instructions. Talking about instructions, talking about hardware, sort of. Here's another lightning question for you both. Graham, clip guns or hair dryers?
Hair dryers.
Go on, why?
You're talking about which gun I prefer?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely the curling tongs. I mean, what a piece of design that is. Yeah, totally alien, clumsy as anything. Looks far too much like a hair product, but it's still.
Thank God you said that. I thought you were going to say something else then.
No, let's not go there. But I've always loved that clicking noise it makes when it goes into the holster in those first 3 series. And it's the one, it's probably, I spent some money on some merchandise a couple of years ago, and I bought myself a Liberator handgun, a replica handgun, and it's got pride of place in the living room on a plinth. So yeah, definitely that one.
Is it really? I might have to hit you up for a link for that later on, because I've got my eye on those. Lily, how about you? You got the clip guns or the hair dryers?
Oh no, I'm definitely with you on the older curling tongs, because they look fab, and I've seen the mock-up ones, and I really want one. So one day.
They're iconic, aren't they? They are really, really iconic. And I hate to say this because I love the clip guns. And what you were talking about, that click of the Liberator when they go into their holster.
Yeah.
I love that clink that comes out with a clip gun. I'm doing it now. People can't see me, but I'm actually doing it. I'm drawing now. I'm drawing fire now. That metallic sort of clink that they give off. And the fact that you can change the ammunition to do different things. They never did enough with that, really. But I love that idea. Yeah, Sulin sort of swinging it up at you. Oh, yeah, I love all that stuff. Every time I even think about it, I always feel about 8 years old again.
Yeah.
Is there a dream bit of merch out there, Lily, that doesn't exist, that you're surprised that you can't buy? You know, for example, a Bluetooth Aurak that can sort of switch your lights on and off or run your TiVo for you.
Oh, that sounds great. Like Alexa, but Aurak.
Yeah. Could you tolerate that though? Because you said he gets on your nerves.
If it talked like Zen, let's have a Zen. That would be lovely. A Zen. That turned my lights on for me. Oh,
everybody needs a Zen. I think that definitely could work. These are the sorts of questions that you can find trotted out on a daily basis in the Teleport Facebook group. It's up now. There's over 1,000 members. I think there's 1,007, full enough, something like that. And yes, every single day you can have conversations about Blake 7, the characters, the series back in the day, the audio stuff now. You can talk about collectibles. You can talk about the things that you've been looking for since, or you can even talk about your fantasy picks, bits of merchandise that they haven't made yet, or maybe even send your suggestions to Graham at Cult Edge for what you'd like to see on there. But yes, you can find that on Facebook. Teleport, a Blake 7 fan group. You can load up with real-time Blake 7 talk there. But this last week, because I knew we'd be recording, we were talking about sort of the genesis of Blake 7 fandoms, really, across the decades. I ran a poll because I was really, really curious for a vintage TV show. Exactly what was the breakdown now? What is the shape of the Blake 7 fanbase? Where or how did people first see this show? And the results came back, and we have at 1.25% of the vote are people who found it through YouTube, or on BBC Two's little repeat season they did about 15, 20 years ago, or over on UK Gold. Because UK Gold was the home of Blake 7 and Doctor Who for quite a while too. They used to trot these things out on a Sunday morning. It was a staple, it's only fair to say. At 2.5% of the vote were the people who found it on DVD, Lily, just like you. So I expected a few more of those, Graham, I have to say, because those box sets were quite affordable, and obviously you can still get them now. Yeah. At 7.5% of the vote found it on VHS. It came out twice, didn't it, with different sleeves.
Oh, so it did. I forgot, yeah. It was repackaged, wasn't it?
International repeats in the USA or Australia, other countries where Blake 7 was a staple of, for example, PBS or cable. 15% of the vote found it internationally like that. But probably not unsurprisingly. Winning by a considerable margin, this vote, 71.25% of the vote are people such as yourself and I, Graham, who found this show when it was originally broadcast.
Wow.
And are still sort of mildly obsessed with it now. Now, you could take that as confirmation, Lily, that this show's audience and appeal is ageing out. I choose to look at it this way, that if I was to have ran this poll 10 years ago, that original broadcast figure would have probably been about 92%. So, has that surprised you at all, Lily?
No, I mean, it's quite... maybe not niche, but it's certainly quite different from Doctor Who in that respect.
Yeah,
I think so. No, I wouldn't say that. I'd say that by all the fans that I do know, that a lot of them did watch it then and still do. So I think that's probably not surprising in the nicest way, of course.
It's sweet, isn't it? I think it's well past the point, because obviously we don't talk about things being dated quite so much now. So none of this is a sadness about it. I think it's very, very sweet, and that loyalty there, and the staying power of the content. Nostalgia will only keep people going back to something for so long. I look at the two films, and this is going off on a little bit of a tangent, but somebody asked me recently whether I preferred The Goonies to Stand By Me, because The Goonies is this amazing film, and it's very extravagant, and it's got, the truffle shuffle and all this sort of stuff. But Stand By Me I think, is the better film. And as I get older, that's the film I go back and watch more and more over and over. And yet the two sort of had a similar appeal at the time. And I think Blake 7 is a Stand By Me, not a Goonies. I think that you do, what I was saying about the characters earlier on, I think that at different times in your life, whoever you are, and even the world around us, how it changes socially and politically, and how the rest of cult entertainment changes too. I think the character of Callie, actually, Lily, was probably before her time. Telepathy now is okay. I'm yet to meet an actual telepath. I'm sure it's only a question of time. We've just found that there could be life on Venus after all. But yes, even though that's to be accepted, things like that, they never lose their allure. Characters like that, I mean, obviously we're more used to now seeing a greater mix of female to male characters in all drama, let alone genre fiction. I do think that for everything that you could say about the female characters on Blake 7, that a lot of the things that weren't there for them weren't there for some of the men on the show either. Probably a discussion to be had another time. But yeah, as I said in the intro, Blake Seven's longevity has been aided by those home video releases and DVDs, and now by social media and the investment of Big Finish and whatever over the last 2 decades. But the series' arrival on BritBox in the UK has to be a big watershed moment. BritBox was founded in 2017 by BBC Studios and ITV Studios, a pretty much unprecedented team-up, a co-venture by both these huge British broadcasters to exploit both their archives, originally overseas. It premiered in America first, and 2.5 years later it launched in the UK this Christmas just gone, making a big splash, particularly with Doctor Who. They played that right up front. But most recently, just a couple of weeks ago, they opened up Blake 7. Yes, on the 8th of September 2020, BritBox hit social media with a branded image of the Series C crew with the logo BritBox and the Blake 7 logo, and this statement. Short but sweet, it said, "You asked and we listened. Blake 7 will be available to stream on BritBox from Thursday the 10th of September. All 52 episodes of the show, along with Terry Nation's other series, Lily, Survivors, and a few other titles." Yes, Graham, how did you feel about this when you saw this news?
I was over the moon. And I think you're right. I think it's a real watershed for the show, because it's interesting that the majority of the people that responded to your poll saw the show originally, because I think what we need to do is make sure that more people, more younger people, get to see the show. And I think having it on BritBox is going to do wonders for the show, and hopefully people will see why it was so popular. I think we forget just how massively popular Blake 7 was. It was mainstream TV. It had a massive audience, and I think, for good reason. So yeah, I was to see that banner on the BritBox homepage was really exciting. I got that Blake 7 thrill that you can't quite put your finger on when I saw that. See that branding everywhere again was hugely exciting. So I'm hoping that it'll lead to more, it'll lead to something else. It might lead to, who knows, a remake, a reappraisal even would be great, because it's not just that wobbly set show. It's got so much more going for it than that. And I think having it on BritBox will open the doors to some new fans, which I think is what the programme really desperately needs. Yeah,
Blake 7 on the go, Lily. Does this appeal to you?
Oh, I mean, I think hopefully it'll be a little bit like what Twitch did for Doctor Who, and get people a kind of nice thing. Because the nice thing about Twitch was people getting this new affection for particularly the first Doctor, I thought. So I'm hoping that with BritBox and Blake 7, we're going to get that, and we're going to get all these people and all my friends going, "Oh, I love Avon or Blake or whoever," and getting that, jumping on board with that. So I really hope so.
That's a really, really good call. I had no idea what Twitch was. I'm in my 40s, but I had no idea what Twitch was. But I remember when Doctor Who launched on there, it snuck in with people, didn't it? I think people were watching it ironically a little at first, and really got seduced by it to the fact where they couldn't tear themselves away. And okay, that was free, wasn't it? I understand, on Twitch. This is behind a paywall. But BritBox is doing quite well anyway, from what I understand. For convenience, I think generally it's doing pretty well. So I think what could happen is that people pick out one episode and sample it to see what all the fuss is about. And on past experience, I find that very few people who try Blake 7, Lily, can resist watching the entire run. I think once it's got you, if people watch 2 episodes, they're going to go for the whole 52. That's my gut instinct.
I mean, I think that's what I found. I think I sort of watched it and went, I want to know what happens to Blake and all that. So yeah, I know I did.
It was popular demand that brought Blake 7 to BritBox. I know they had, lots and lots.
I think people expected it to be there earlier than it was, definitely.
So it'd be great to see the BBC kind of hold the show in a bit more of a higher regard now, and as I say, kind of maybe do something more with the show, like, make it available digitally to buy as well. It's never been available digitally on iTunes, for example. So, let's repackage the show again and get some new extras on there. And there's a whole new generation of fans coming out the woodwork. And
Kevin, John Davies, if you're out there listening to this, that means you, my friend. We want more extras from you, please. Come on the show. Come on, teleport, Kevin. Come on, have a chat to Dan. I believe that all of those things will happen. I mean, it's early days, obviously. We're just a couple of weeks into this, and I thank BritBox for timing the launch of this on their platform with the launch of this podcast. Obviously, they had that in mind. We were talking, of course we were. No, but it is. This does feel long overdue. I don't know about you, Graham, but when I was doing my episode watch along, I was doing it with friends. A lot of them were watching it naughty on YouTube, because for years it's sat there on YouTube and Daily Motion that people have loaded up. And I think the BBC, they've got to, I think they knew it was there. Like you say, they didn't value Blake 7 that much, so kind of thought it was harmless being left where it was. It's doing no harm, and they weren't interested in it. But those episodes were removed, which is obviously absolutely their right to do. I've got no problem with them taking them down at all. I didn't put them up. I want to make that clear. I didn't put them up. But yes, the fact that they took them down, is more than fair enough. But yeah, they were there for a long time, and I did wonder, these are coming down, but the fact that they'd done that did mean that they were going to bring it in from the cold, give it a bit of TLC. And as you say, maybe, I don't really know how it works with iTunes. I'm not quite sure, because these things evolve so much, whether they would want to sort of split it across those, or what its plans are for Blake 7 internationally. I should say this, if you are in America, apparently it's not on the American BritBox yet. I would imagine that it's got to be coming soon. And Australia, you haven't even got BritBox. And I think it's due there by the end of the year, at which point, because Blake 7 was so popular there with you, I can't imagine that it won't be there at launch. Yes, Blake 7 unarguably still lives on, guys, and whether it's the character dynamics that you were talking about, Lily, or some of that kitsch appeal that we've spoken about, or just telling those good, tight sci-fi thrillers. It could be all of those things constantly sort of shuffling and pushing each other around for elbow room over the decades. I'm not entirely sure. Whatever gives them this sort of comfy, cosy and inviting sort of quality that people still want to come and join it. But the entertainment industry is always hungry for more content, more intellectual properties and more formats, aren't they? I mentioned Crossroads at the top of the show. Crossroads came back. I can't see why Blake 7 couldn't come back. And this brings me to my final thought, really. I want to ask both of you. There are people out there who are fiercely against the idea of Blake 7 coming back in any way to television, being filmed again in any format. Do you agree with that, Lily? And if not, where do you think it would be best suited? Back as a TV show, as a long-running TV show, back as an event series on something like Amazon Prime, or on the big screen as a big movie? Where would you like it to go?
I mean, a movie's an interesting idea, but it's sort of made me think a little bit Big Finish again. You know, what they've done with things like Callan and The Prisoner and kind of resurrecting those roles, and they've been quite, I think, welcomed. So I think the thing about a remake is, yes, some of them are rubbish, but if they're done right, if they're done well, I think it can work, although it depends on what medium, whether it be audio or film. I mean, Blake 7 never really came to sort of big movie, and whether it would suit that or not, I don't know whether it's that kind of show, or whether it's a sort of small, more intimate show perhaps in that way. I don't know.
It is hard to say, because its appeal obviously is quite domestic, is quite intimate, being a vintage show from an era when TV screens were so much smaller and the average living room was so much smaller, wasn't it, Graham? If you remember, the average TV used to be about 26 inches.
Oh, tiny, screen. Yeah. No more, not much bigger than my iPad.
But where do you sit with this one, Graham? And should Blake 7 be attempted again? Because people have tried, haven't they? And if so, what's your instinct? Where do you think it should end up?
Of course it should come back. Of course it should come back. And I'd love to see it come back as 4 more series of 13 episodes. I think it's a massive universe. The premise is timeless. I think I'd probably prefer a continuation rather than a remake, because I'd love to see the influence that Blake and the crew had in that universe and what's happened. And I think there's so many fantastic stories that could be told within that premise. And I think, you know, we just have to look at something like the Battlestar Galactica remake, which brought back a glossy 70s sci-fi show. And and delivered something that was very much of the time and dark, political, and character driven, and everything that a new Blake 7 could be. So, and it'll never take away from those original 52 episodes. We'll always have them. It might even open the door for even more fans to go back and revisit those. So for me, it kind of continuing that legacy is a no-brainer. And I still, for the life of me, it's 38, 40 years after the show ended, why has nobody picked this up?
I think the comparison with Battlestar Galactica is very, very fair. And I do think it's got potentially... I don't think it's quintessentially British at its very sort of core. I think it could be international very, very successfully. I don't think there's a lot fewer constraints on it than something like, I'm sorry to mention this again, but something like Doctor Who. It's capable. It's built for anybody who understands it, actually, come to think of it. Any creative out there who connects with it on any level. And if they have enough enthusiasm and clout, obviously, because to get these things, everybody has an idea, it's getting the things made. Get somebody like that. They don't even have to love the show the way we do, as long as they feel the show, know what it's about, and take the time to get into the heart of it, and can just see it with a different pair of eyes.
Yeah.
I'm fascinated by the idea. At the end of the day, nobody's ever going to take those 52 episodes away from us, and I'm sure that Big Finish, what they've been doing there, with several dozens by now, there's all that to dip into if you choose. I really think that Blake 7, its finest hour, maybe even a golden era, could be right around the corner.
That would be great.
Let's hope so. Right? It's been great to finally chat with you both this evening. If anybody wants to hear more of you, Lily, or read more, or see some of your photography, where should we send them? What links have you got?
Oh, obviously I'm on Twitter, where I post anything and everything about cult TV and everything otherwise. I mean, if you want to see my photography, you can go to www.lilymayphotography.co.uk, and there's all my photos on there. If you're interested in the things I do, there's band photos on there. There's landscapes and all sorts of things that I've done. So if anyone's interested in that, you're more than welcome.
Of course they're interested. Graham, you're a man of many talents, aren't you? I think we've established this already. But where can people hear your podcast? What's it called again?
The podcast's called When We Were Out. It's on iTunes, it's on Spotify. I think it's everywhere that podcasts are.
It's everywhere. And yes, people are going to want to browse and maybe be smitten by some of your wares. Remind them where they can go again.
The best place to follow me really is Twitter, because you'll find all the links in the in my biography on there, and it's at cult_edge. And if you want to see the design that I do in my day job, the stuff that pays the bills, then just go to graham.design. That's grahame.design.
It's all there. Lily and Graham, I do hope you'll both come back at some point. But yes, for now, stay down, stay safe.
It was a pleasure.
Yeah.
And there we have it, the first edition of Teleport, delivered a lot safer than a bunch of cons to Cygnus Alpha. I'll be back with some more intergalactic intelligence soon. Look out for that wherever you found this, on the podcatcher of your choice maybe, or on the Spacebooks YouTube channel. All our links are in the show notes and the descriptions over there on the world's largest streaming platform. And don't be shy, there's no telepaths here. Get in touch, let us know what you think of it all. Email teleport care of the Spacebook at outlook.com. And if you feel like signing up with a ragtag bunch of fellow Blake 7 fans, join the Teleport Facebook group. Just enter Teleport, a Blake 7 fan group, into the search field there, and you're away, standard by, well, however much your 4G can take. I'm Dan Hadley. Hunt me down on Twitter and Instagram as the Spacebook, talking about whatever catches my eye, imagination, or both in popular culture. My thanks again to Lily and Graham for helping launch this whole new show. And thanks to you for listening. Join me again next time here on Teleport, a Blake 7 podcast. Teleport, a Blake 7 podcast, is a Spacebook production with music by Problem Being.